Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm your host John Lorden, and just in time for Halloween, it's the return of the bloody eye. This is what happens when I get a case like this one this week to dig into. I have been reading so many websites, watching so much video, hours and hours of video for this case. And that's despite the fact that I had an excellent researcher working on this. So before I jump into the mystery of Betty and Barney Hill, I have to first give a huge thank you to Dead by Dawn, a brain scratcher who did a really good job researching this case. And on top of that, I had other researchers also sending in information for Halloween. So know that next week's episode of Case Cracked, we're going to have a little Halloween twinge on that for the day of Halloween. And even next week's Johnny Vlogs is going to have some research kicked in that has a little bit of a spookier twist in it than I usually would have on an episode of Johnny Vlogs. So thank you to all the researchers that are sending in information. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys out there. So with all that being said, let's start on the case of Betty and Barney Hill. Now, you guys know, if you look at the history of BrainScratch, sure, there's a lot of true crime stuff that I cover, but I also love looking into fringe stories, particularly aliens. I've done many episodes. We did the Battle of LA, we did the Travis Walton abduction case. So for this one, Dead by Dawn was really big on this topic, and as soon as I saw what it was, I said, hey, let's go for it. This is essentially the first alien abduction to have supposedly happened in the US. Now, there are a few other stories of alien abduction, but this is the first one specifically for the US that gained a lot of traction, a lot of popularity. There's been several books written about it. There was a television movie made about it in 1975 featuring one of the coolest aliens to ever exist. Well, at least the actor that did his voice. James Earl Jones plays Barney Hill in that film, and we know James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader, who might be one of the coolest aliens to ever exist. And yes, he is an alien. Remember, it was a galaxy far, far away, so he can't be human. Or maybe he's human and for some reason he traveled. I don't know, guys. Is Darth Vader an alien? Let's save that for a Johnny Vlogs. But James Earl Jones did a really good job on a television film called The UFO Incident, which is specifically about this case. Really, that guy is an amazing actor. And it was kind of cool to watch an older a movie made for television from the mid-70s. It's pretty interesting to see that there was a lot of talent put in, especially to the script, and then of course the performance from James Earl Jones. It's weird because I don't really see TV movies like that anymore. It was kind of a neat nostalgia trip to check that out. So in the description box below, you will see there is a ton of different resources. There's more stuff down there than we're probably even going to get to in this video, but one of those links is the UFO Incident, so you can check it out for yourself and see what all this buzz is about. But this case, we definitely have to turn back the clock a little bit. This happened in 1961. This was September, I believe it's the 19th, if I recall right. We'll jump to a website where we get some better details on all of it. But it is essentially the story of an interracial married couple. They had been married for just about a year. They are traveling back from a quick little vacation that they took in Canada, heading back to New Hampshire. And what's really interesting about this case, I kind of compare it a lot to the Travis Walton case. You had the same kind of thing happen there where there was books written, movies made, but it's really the credibility of the witnesses that is quite a bit different. You know, in the Travis Walton case, if you really dig into it, there are some questions about his backstory. Ultimately, you have a bunch of kind of roughneck guys that were working together that had that experience. It's a bit different when you have someone that is a social worker and the other guy is a postman, which is the case here with Betty and Barney. As a matter of fact, I found this article at yankeeskeptic.com, which is essentially about Barney and his civil rights work that he also conducted while working for the post office. And it really touches on this point pretty well. So what made the Hills different than so many abduction stories to come later, the Hills were obviously not what might be referred to as kooks. They were a modest married couple living in a very conservative state. They were something new, a couple that, while interracial, were just like the rest of us. Betty Hill graduated from UNH, where her papers and artifacts from her life and the abduction experience now reside. Barney was involved in the civil rights movement at a time when it was very dangerous work. Barney was given several awards for his civil rights work, including an award from the governor of the state of New Hampshire. Barney was also invited to the inauguration ceremony of President Lyndon Johnson as a thank you for his service to his country. The Hills were respected citizens who had much to lose by coming forward with a story of abduction. And that is one of the things that also gives them a pretty strong sense of credibility. They didn't go through this experience and get home and then the next day they're reaching out to press and media and trying to publicize their story. Their story unfolds in a very slow way, and it takes several years for the media to actually catch wind of it. And when they do, it's believed that it happened through a breach of trust. Essentially, they had sent information to someone about their story. They were looking for more help trying to understand it, and it seems like that person flipped it to the media, and that's when things kind of got out of hand. So I know, especially like with Travis's case, it's hard to look at those things in hindsight because we can see the fame that happens around those types of instances. But according to all indicators in this case, these people were not looking for this attention. And if this is truly the first UFO abduction experience of a notable level to happen in the United States, there is no framework for them to know what type of attention that would be. And yeah, they could have gotten let go from their jobs. People could look at them differently or consider them kooks and, hey, I don't want to work with people like that. And they could have probably been easily dismissed from both of their jobs. So this is something that, especially for the time, you have to keep in mind. They had to be a bit delicate about. Now, looking at Travis's story, if you do consider that he knew about this case before, there you might have a bit of a framework where you could say, well, Travis could have looked at what happened with the Betty and Barney story and, he saw the movie come out. As a matter of fact, I think the UFO Incident film debuted in 1975. If I recall correctly, isn't that the same year that Travis had his disappearance? I think it is, but so there might be something to that where you could see people later and say, well, they saw all the fame and money that came out of this, so they're basically just trying to make their own UFO alien abduction story and profit from it. But really, for this case, that's pretty hard to believe. Also, you can actually find segments of the tape. Essentially, both Betty and Barney had to go to a hypnotist. Actually, a hypnotherapist, I think is the better way to say it, and tried to do some hypnosis regression memory work. And those tapes are actually available. I have a link to Barney's down below. I couldn't find a link for Betty's specifically, but I've heard clips of it on some different documentaries that I've watched. But if you listen to the experience that these people are having, at least in their regression memory therapy setting, it's pretty easy to believe that they certainly went through something, and it's something that in particular really, really scared Barney to the point where, he's literally screaming at a couple points in his therapy sessions. So, very interesting case indeed. So jumping over to SkepticReport.com, you guys know that I like to use Wikipedia to try to be kind of the backbone of the case as I review it. The article on them is just too big and it goes into way too many facets of their life, but I do have it included in the description box below so you can check it out for yourself. I was really interested in trying to get to the core story here, the core evidence, and review that. And this article in particular at SkepticReport.com has a couple of sections where they really do a good job drawing out those core pieces. One of the problems that you will have when you try to look into this story is everyone tries to tell this story in the most complete way, which if you look at the order of events is actually kind of in the middle and way after the event actually happened. What you have is an experience that both Betty and Barney seem to remember from that specific night, which is a very short experience and doesn't have a whole lot of detail. Then you have them going to hypnotherapy, and all of that information getting jumbled in with that first part of the story. And then that's usually the thing that you'll hear people recite, which is kind of, it's just this kind of Frankenstein of the story. There are 4 distinct perspectives going on in this story, and they're not always separated. So I wanted to do my best when I was reviewing this to try to separate those a little bit and note the differences. The 4 sides that I was talking about are, you have Betty's point of view, and you have Barney's point of view, and you have their point of view on what actually happened in their original experience. But then you have them actually having separate hypnotherapy sessions and separate lines of information that are coming out much later that coincide with that day. So that's what I mean by there's kind of these 4 major block pieces, and then there's one big question which we'll get to by the end of this video on top of that. But what is pretty much undisputed, in summary, their original experience comprised of the following. Number 1, sighting of a UFO that followed their car as they were driving from Niagara Falls to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on the night of the 19th of September, 1961. And let's make an important distinction here. They noted something in the air that they could not readily identify. And if you listen to the hypnosis tapes, you'll even hear Barney kind of complaining a little bit about Betty's perspective here. It seems like she was certainly predisposed to thinking that it was some type of UFO related to an alien presence. And there's a reason for this. A few years before this experience, her sister actually says that she had an experience where she saw a alien-related UFO. So Barney is definitely frustrated by this. He's thinking, nah, it's just an airplane. It's just an airplane. Point number 2, Barney stopped the car and used binoculars, saw figures inside the UFO. Once again, this is undisputed. They pulled over, he pulled the binoculars out and looked. Now, what he saw, I guess you could say, that is now going strictly to his perspective. If we look at the hypnotherapy sessions, he did not want to see aliens in that craft. He is very upset and frustrated at the fact that he can't identify this as an airplane. He wants to basically tell Betty, calm down, you're acting crazy. This is obviously an airplane. And when he pulls up the binoculars, he apparently sees what he describes as a pancake-shaped object with a front that has a row of windows that curve with the shape of this pancake. He also describes 2 lights at each side of this pancake and some kind of wings that change. They seem to change length, like they're coming out of the body of the ship, and he is able to see that because of the lights at the tip of the wings. He describes them as bat wings, if I remember correctly. As a matter of fact, we do have a picture that I can show you guys real quick. This is a picture as Barney actually drew it himself. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And he's saying with the binoculars that he was able to see in the front of that, and he saw 5 figures that were looking out at him. You know, I did a little research. It's really hard to tell what the range was for binoculars in the 1960s. The distances that he's talking about, he's saying this thing was 80 to 100 feet off the ground and about 300 feet away from him. Would a set of binoculars really give you the proper distance to make up for that and let you see inside the front of this craft? It's a little bit of a question to me. I don't think it's totally. I think there's a chance that it could work, but it is still a question to me. One of the things that hit me a little strange is he describes these figures and says at one point that they went towards a wall behind them and they were using levers that were on that wall. And it just, you know, I don't know, an alien species that can travel all the way to Earth and they're using levers, it just seemed a little strange to me. Maybe he was identifying something else that they were doing, and in his mind that was the most logical thing, that there was levers on the back wall. I'm not sure. He describes these creatures as almost looking, he specifically says, like Nazis. Apparently they are wearing black uniforms and what they refer to as these small black cadet hats. Now what's a little strange about this is at some point Betty even winds up getting a sculpture made of what these aliens look like, and for some reason there's no hat on the sculpture. As a matter of fact, even the pictures that Barney draws, actually, this one he drew, I believe, under hypnosis, and he does include the cap on this one. When he's later awake, I can't tell if the cap is really on that one or not. But he did also make this statement that the lips appeared to have no muscles, which I don't quite know what that means. How would you know if there was muscles in lips or not? I really don't know. And that's another little point of discrepancy between their two accounts. According to Barney's hypnotherapy session, they were using some type of mental telepathy to communicate with him. They weren't moving their mouth, they weren't speaking out loud, but he knew what they were thinking. And the way he describes it, he was going through some type of mind break-in or something right from the start of seeing the craft. At some point, he's talking about the voices he's hearing in his head that are telling him, keep looking, don't move, keep looking, don't move. Betty has a totally different experience. She says, no, they were talking, they were using their mouths, they were speaking English. They seemed to have an accent that she couldn't identify. Some of them were better with speaking English than others were. So very, very different experience considering the two of them. Betty's trip aboard the spacecraft she was awake for all of it. And she notes that Barney was passed out and two of them were carrying him aboard the spacecraft. So very, very different experiences going on here, but the story still kind of fits together. So after they stop the car and use the binoculars, they panic. Number 3, in a panic, Barney drove away from the UFO. Number 4, they heard a beeping sound. Number 5, when they heard the same beeping sound again, they were driving 35 miles south of the sighting location. They had no recollection of what happened to them between the two sets of beeping sounds. So here we get into essentially lost time. This is a section of time that can't be accounted for, and that is all they know on this specific night. They haven't done the therapy yet. That wouldn't happen until years later, so they don't, at this point, they don't seem to have a theory about them being abducted by the aliens. They just have these odd occurrences that they can't quite explain and some serious lost time. They got home at about 5 a.m. on the morning of the 20th of September, 1961. Afterwards, they experienced continued anxiety and ill-defined fears that made them seek answers to what really happened to them. Apparently, this anxiety was so bad that Barney had to take 6 months off of work. He was having blood pressure issues, stomach ulcers, which apparently he had previously, but they came back as well. A lot of physical issues resulting seemingly from stress around all this. And it is worth noting in his hypnotherapy sessions, he does speak a lot about being a black man, about being misunderstood, about being worried about people that might not be treating him properly. Something that this actually doesn't go into is the gun. He has a gun with him. And according to the film, I didn't find a whole lot of information around this, but I did see several people talk about how accurate the film was with its information. According to the film, he is also nervous about the gun being in the trunk because he's going to have to pass customs as he comes back into the U.S. And he's thinking, what did I take this stupid gun for? And it boils down to basically racial anxiety. He's worried that someone's going to try to harm him or his wife because of them being so different from everyone else. So this is a man that was truly dealing with stresses at many, many levels. Like I mentioned, they were only married for a year, and pretty much he moved out of an African-American neighborhood and moved into what was largely an all-white neighborhood. So this is something that seemed to really weigh heavy on his mind. The only official investigation into their UFO sighting on that fateful night was conducted by Major Paul W. Henderson, who spoke to the Hills by telephone a few hours after their encounter. It took Project Blue Book 2 years to produce a final report on their sighting. Dated the 27th of September 1963, it claimed that there was insufficient evidence to determine what caused their sighting. It guesses that they probably saw Jupiter or it was caused by something similar. So they did actually reach out to the Air Force and file I don't know if it's a complaint, but they did file a report specifically with the Air Force. Betty Hill had a series of nightmares running from the 29th of September to the 3rd of October 1961. She dreamt that alien men took them to a landed craft in the nearby woods and conducted medical examinations on them before returning them to their car. Betty tended to think these dreams might have been memories of real events, but Barney just thought they were vivid dreams. A little important note of clarification there. Betty actually was telling her boss about these dreams, and it was her boss who initially suggested maybe those are actually memories and you aren't just dreaming this. There is some question. Suggestion is a very big topic around this whole story, because even outside of the hypnosis factor. She is talking about this story to her sister. She's talking about it to her boss. And there's a very important point about all that we're going to hit by the end of this video as well. A meeting that was to have a great deal of importance for the whole case occurred on the 25th of November 1961 when two UFO investigators associated with NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson, interviewed the Hills for 12 hours. Also in attendance was Major James McDonald, an Air Force intelligence officer and old friend of Barney's. During the meeting, the investigators tried piecing together the journey, and it was now that they discovered that the journey was 2 hours longer than expected. So now we know that they arrived 35 miles away in terms of lost time, but it seems like there was more time than that actually lost, up to 2 full hours that are unaccounted for. In the months after the encounter, Barney's health deteriorated, but it was not until the first half of 1964 that Boston psychiatrist and neurologist Dr. Benjamin Simon conducted the hypnotic regression sessions that were to fully reveal their abduction experience. So now we get into the information that came out in therapy. Number 1, they went down a back road that was blocked by 11 or 12 aliens who were approximately 5 foot 4 inches tall. These humanoids had no ears, but slit-like mouths, small noses, cat-like eyes that seemed to extend to the side of their heads, and broad foreheads that tapered down to a small chin. What I find interesting about that is, in an earlier recollection from Barney, I believe, he described them as having black hair, and now in this information that is starting to change quite a bit. Also, outside of the black uniform he mentioned, he did say that one of them seemed to have a scarf around them and then it was draped over one of their shoulders. That never gets mentioned in this retelling of the story, or in the most popular retellings of the story. They were taken to a nearby landed UFO. Inside the UFO, they were put into separate rooms where they were stripped and put on examination tables. The aliens inserted a long needle into Betty's navel. She's told it's a pregnancy test. A cup-like instrument was placed over Barney's groin. Later, he had a ring of warts where this was placed. Betty spoke to one of the aliens. He showed her a star map. She tried taking away a book full of strange writing, but she was not allowed to take it away. That's worded a little bit differently than what I understand happened. According to Betty, who she considered the leader of these aliens actually offered for her to take this book that was written in a language that she couldn't understand. And then a different alien said, no, we can't let her have that, and we need them to forget that all of this happened. She was really frustrated at that because it was her proof. She wanted to take the book with her, but they would not allow it. So it's a little bit different than it's worded here. When Betty is returned to their car, she sees Barney sitting inside of it in kind of a daze. Also worth noting, they had a dog with them throughout all this named Delcy. And the dog apparently was in the car throughout all this, I guess. There's no mention of the dog being looked at or examined by the aliens. From very early on, Betty understandably read as much as she could about the subject that influenced and shaped what she recalled as a real alien abduction experience. And this mentions Betty's sister that cited one in 1957 as well. So I do think that's raising a bit of an important point. These were people, that were smart. They looked into this more once they got back, and Betty basically dove into a bunch of books on this topic. So did that influence her memories? Maybe did that even potentially cause some of her dreams? I think that's a really important question to ask. Betty claims that at 2:14 a.m. on the 20th of September 1961, Peace Air Force Base picked up a UFO on a radar, and they sent out 2 aircraft to investigate it. What the pilots saw, according to Betty, has remained classified ever since. I haven't seen a whole lot of mentions of this occurrence. Apparently there was a reporter that also knew something about this, but he lost his notes, and so his source was not identified. It's a bit interesting because Betty, if you see her interviewed, she feels like a bit of a storyteller. I don't know if that I would say storyteller like lying, but she's definitely a gabber. This is a woman that really, really likes to talk and seemingly talk a lot. For example, if you look in the description box below, you'll see that the first section of links is about 10 different videos that are all interviews of her. Now, they're broken into 10-minute segments for some reason, but you're talking almost 2 hours of Betty talking about all of this, and she was in her 70s, I think, when that video was made. I mean, this is a woman that really, really loves to talk, not just about this, but you can tell that she's just that type of person. After their encounter, they found 6 strange, shiny spots the size of $1 on the car's trunk. It's weird because I've seen some things describe it like almost like the car was buffed too much or something along those lines, and the spots eventually disappeared. I guess they eventually washed away. But she did take a compass at, she once again told her friends about these spots, and one of her friends suggested that she take a compass out to those spots and see if the compass acts odd. Apparently she did that, and the compass needle goes wacky. But this also says that Barney tried, and when Barney tried it, the compass acted just normal. So I really don't know how to take that story one way or another. I think there's an assumption that these spots on the back of the car had something to do with the tones that they were hearing at the start and at the end of their lost time. But I really can't think of a reasonable explanation for what those spots might be. The dress Betty wore during the abduction was found to be covered in a pink powder. She also found the hem and seams torn. Now, what's weird about this is she finds this pink powder all over it, but according to one version of this story, she hangs it up on a clothesline and the pink powder all blows off. Now, apparently people have asked for parts of the dress. She has been cutting away parts of the dress and sending it to different labs. I saw a note from one doctor or one scientist that says that they found something, that they tested it, and they're convinced that what she's saying is real and that all this really happened, but they did not explain any of the science behind their finding whatsoever. Of course, I did see it in relation to a book that is being sold on this, so I think they probably want you to buy the book to find out. But if any of you know that information about the doctor that tested her dress and actually found something, please share it in the comments with the rest of us so we can all have a better understanding of what's going on with that. 6 to 8 weeks after their encounter, they returned home to find a pile of leaves on their kitchen table. When cleaning up the mess, she found the blue earrings she had been wearing the night of the encounter. This is the only place where I've seen this part of the story. Even in that 2 hours of her being interviewed, she doesn't mention this happening. So I'm not sure where this is really coming from. I'm not sure of the validity of it, but I just wanted to share it with you guys. I think the assumption there is that the aliens kept her earrings for some reason and brought it back to her house. What is more believable to me, considering that they kept going out to the area, they kept going out to where they thought they were abducted, trying to find the exact same spot, and I believe they did so on this particular day. What seems much more believable is maybe she or Barney found her earrings out there, considering they were in a pile of leaves on the kitchen table, brought them home and put them there. But that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm really not certain. The most powerful piece of evidence to support their claims was the notorious star map. Astronomer Marjorie Fish created a 3-dimensional map of the star system that matched the star chart seen on board the flying saucer. This seemed to indicate that the aliens originated from the double star system of Zeta Reticuli. Is that the same system that Tatooine is on with its 2 stars? This is very interesting because the information that came out to validate that star map that she drew came out a few years after her supposedly drawing this map. Now, a few people have a few different theories on this star map. And one of those people is kind of famous astronomer Carl Sagan. Why don't we see what he thinks of the star map?
While on board, Betty had noticed a book written in an unknown hieroglyphic writing. She was also shown a strange window through which she could see a glowing pattern of dots connected with lines. It was, they told her, a star map displaying the routes of interstellar commerce. Afterwards, the Hills were released and permitted to return home, or at least this is their story. Now, believers find this account compelling, or at least plausible, chiefly because of the alleged star map. Here's what Betty Hill said it looked like. Now, why would anybody take this seriously? Because here is a real map, widely publicized by UFO enthusiasts, of 15 selected nearby stars, including the sun, as seen from one particular vantage point in space. This map includes stars that were first cataloged several years after Betty Hill recalled what she says she saw in the alien ship. Her map required, we are told, information that was not then available on the Earth. There is a resemblance between the two maps, but that's mainly because the lines corresponding to navigation routes have been copied from the Hill map onto the real star map. If we were to substitute some other set of lines for the Hill lines, we find that the eye suddenly is biased against seeing any agreement between the two maps at all. To make an objective test, however, let's remove the lines altogether. And then there's very little resemblance left. But these particular stars are selected from a large catalog of star positions. Our vantage point in space is also selected to make the best possible fit with the Hill map. If you can pick and choose from a large number of stars, viewed from any vantage point in space you want, you can always find something resembling the pattern you're looking for. I'm surprised that nobody could find a better fit to the Hill map.
So that is kind of the main argument against this star map. It is roughly a collection of dots with some lines drawn through it, but the lines really don't mean anything because those are trade routes of the aliens, and there was apparently also, what's the other one? There was trade routes, and exploration routes that were noted on the map. But as Carl says, remove those lines and you're just looking at a collection of dots, and does that really match? I'll leave it up to you guys, but there is a lot of debate about this, so I'm including some links down below that include much more information about those debates. The main evidence for this abduction comes from the testimony of the Hills that comes from a combination of nightmares and accounts given under hypnotic regression. They came across as sincere and truthful people to everyone who interviewed and met them, though this was undermined by Betty's many subsequent claims of psychic events and sightings of hundreds of UFOs, many of which could be easily explained. And this is something I ran into when I was watching Betty being interviewed in those 10 links that you'll find at the top of the list down below. If you go to some of the later ones, she starts pulling out pictures supposedly of other UFOs, and she's saying, oh yeah, I'm taking these pictures from my porch. She's going out with groups of people out into the wilderness and finding these strange lights, and then she takes a picture of it, and that's a UFO. It's really strange because at the start of watching that video series, she comes off as extremely likable. The information seems trustworthy, and those things do undermine her. I remember one picture in particular that she pulls out that is obviously two mountainsides with a bridge between them, and there is light shining from behind it, so it's lighting up above and below the bridge at the same intensity. And she insists that the shape that is below the bridge, which happens to have a bit of a dome shape because of the type of bridge that it is a spacecraft sitting out in the wilderness. Yeah, so it's a bit tough to believe, but you have to figure this is a woman, at that point she's in her late 70s or coming into her 80s. She at that point has had a lifetime of giving speeches about this. She has the alien head that I told you about earlier, the sculpture. She calls it Junior. She holds it in her lap quite fondly when she's talking about all this. Does that undermine the experience that she originally had? I think it undermines it a little bit, but does it negate it? Not necessarily. I think that there's a lot of information to support that Betty and Barney seriously had something happen that they both truly believe happened to them. Now, the question about all this information that came out during therapy, that is a big question, because are they truly recalling real events, or is Betty recalling her dreams that she admits to having? But then why would Barney have the same dreams? Well, we have a little information on that as well. The doctor that actually conducted all of that work with them went on a radio show, and we have a little clip of him here where he tries to explain that.
How did this Betty story get to Barney, or fragments of it? Well, I asked if she told you, as I said, to anyone. She said to her sister and her supervisor, the one who suggested that this might not be a dream but a reality. Then I asked, where was Barney? Well, of course, he was working nights, and where was he, since he must be around in the daytime? Well, he was over in the corner fussing around with something. So here is a classical thing of what a hypnotized person can do. He tells the truth, and he lies at the same time. The literal thing was, of course, she didn't tell it to Barney. The literal thing was that she didn't tell it to Barney coming from him. But she did tell it in Barney's presence, and that's where he got it.
And that's what's really important when you listen to the details of Barney's therapy in particular. Supposedly his eyes are closed for most of what's going on throughout his tests. They're in separate rooms, so of course they're having separate experiences. But as I mentioned at the start of all this, he is terrified out of his mind. Betty, on the other hand, is kind of having the time of her life. And if you hear her talk about it in those later interviews, she even talks about the fact she's not afraid. She just really loved it. I mean, like, she's visiting with these people. She even asks them to come again because she wants to introduce them to friends of hers that she says would really want to meet them. So I think, and this is, keep in mind, this is the doctor that actually worked with them. I think he's making a really important point here that Barney was aware, and I've heard it from his voice for myself by listening to his therapy sessions. He was aware that Betty was already a fan of a UFO type of knowledge and experience. He was kind of annoyed by it to a certain degree. To think that he's in the same room while she's talking to her boss or her sister about this, of course he's going to hear it, even if he's not truly paying attention to what she's saying. And then under regression hypnotic therapy, he's able to recall some of the details that she was discussing with her friend, even though she didn't tell him directly. So can we get a little bit of a better sense about what the doctor thought here? We're going to jump to KathleenMarden.com. She is actually the niece of Betty. And in an article here, she states it pretty simply. When a consistent account of UFO abduction by non-human entities emerged in both Betty and Barney's independent hypnotic testimony, Dr. Simon attempted to puncture their perceived pseudo-memories of abduction by aliens. He hypothesized that information contained within a series of dreams and nightmares experienced by Betty in September 1961, after she and Barney had witnessed a huge, hovering, silent, unconventional craft, contributed to Barney's abduction fantasy. Furthermore, he anticipated that Betty's hypnotic recall of abduction by extraterrestrials would mimic her dreams. Now, this article does go on to basically kind of refute his claim, and it says there's so much evidence that his dismissal of their points of view really doesn't make sense. I'll leave that up to you guys to review. Quite honestly, this article isn't pointing out anything that I feel like I can give you within a few minutes to help you understand her point of view. And keep in mind, she's selling a book about this. Before we go, I did just want to touch a little bit on hypnosis, and I found this article at psychologytoday.com. And there is a big difference apparently between what's known as stage hypnotism and clinical hypnotism. So let's review that real quick. The truth is that stage hypnotism is essentially a theatrical performance and has about as much in common with bona fide clinical hypnosis as many Hollywood movies have with real life. The fact is, however, that hypnosis is a genuine psychological phenomenon that has valid uses in clinical practice. Simply put, hypnosis is a state of highly focused attention or concentration, often associated with relaxation and heightened suggestibility. Contrary to popular belief, people under hypnosis are in total control of themselves and will never do anything they would normally find highly objectionable. The most frequent clinical uses of hypnosis include breaking bad habits, overcoming insomnia, recalling forgotten experiences, and as an anesthetic for managing pain. Now, what's important there, first of all, is the level of suggestibility. Despite Dr. Simon's best effort, I believe that he may have cross-contaminated a bit of the information himself. If you look into his dialogue with Betty and Barney in their separate sessions, there are certain ideas that he seems to be carrying over from one to the other. Perhaps it would have made more sense if they were going to have true separate hypnotherapy, that they had different doctors. If we're looking at this from a scientific perspective, that would certainly give you a better control. But unfortunately, that isn't what happened here. What is ultimately important is he was trying to help them with what they were going through. I mean, they were extremely stressed about this. Barney in particular was really having trouble dealing with this. And it appears that through this process of hypnotherapy, recording it, playing it back for them so that they can understand it, and then them having those tapes where they could go to other experts and say, does this make sense to you? We don't know what to make of this. It ultimately seemed to help them kind of come out of the haze and fog of this experience and move forward a little bit. Now, unfortunately, Barney only lives until 1969, dies of a stroke, and his wife Betty has a nice full life. She lives 85 years, and their tombstones kind of sum it all up. It's kind of a bummer that he isn't known more for his civil rights work, in my perspective. Being associated with a book title, if nothing else, I guess that's kind of a cool way to memorialize yourself. But, well, brain scratchers, that is the case of Betty and Barney Hill. And basically the question for you is, number one, do you think that something really occurred to them out there? Number two, do you think that this hypnotherapy accurately got information about that occurrence? I'm really not certain. I'm really still right down the middle on this case. Even despite the fact that I feel like Betty kind of takes her love of UFOs and aliens a bit too far later in her life, I still look at the information from the time, and it's extremely compelling. And just knowing what type of people they were, what types of careers they both had, I don't see them making this up for fame. As a matter of fact, Barney, socially, I think would have probably felt more comfortable if he didn't have a whole lot of attention coming his way. But I don't know. I really don't know. Please let me know what you find out there. There's a lot of information on this case. Share the links with the rest of us in the comments down below. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Brain Scratch. Catch you next week for some more closer to spooky Halloween stuff, especially on Monday. But I hope that you all have an awesome weekend, and I will see you next time on the Lord and Arts channel.